Thank you all for joining me today for this webinar. We are going to spend the next 20-25 minutes talking about vulnerabilities and, more important, how to take these vulnerabilities and turn them into insights. We are going to look at this world of vulnerabilities and the challenges that companies are facing, but we are going to spend a little different view and look at the data points and what we can learn from these data points. So we all know the challenge that every organization is facing, how to deal effectively with the constant flow of new vulnerabilities and how to manage the cyber risk. Take into account that if you are facing a challenge, most probably all your other colleagues are facing very similar challenges. Most probably, if you're trying to manage your cyber risk and decide where to invest your resources, all your colleagues are dealing with the same thing. We are working with many customers and we are analyzing and observing the data, and what we see in one customer is actually very similar to what we see in others, and I'm going to share some of these insights with you today. I'm going to talk about three areas. We'll start with looking at the security aspect. The team who is working on the security using the vulnerability scanner, look at what the data or actions that the vulnerability scanners are providing and could be very, very useful. And at the same time, look at the data that we are collecting and ask ourselves, what can we learn from that? What will it teach us? What should we do differently? We will also look then, on the second part, we will look at the organization structure. We'll look at the way that the enterprise is built, is structured, how are the processes that are the enterprise is following creates a dilemma for us to deal with, and what are we learning from analyzing the behavior and the processes in an enterprise. And the third area that we will cover, we'll look into the external sources, how external sources impact what we do, and how external sources are actually leading us to do things in a slightly different way, and if we're doing them or not. With that, I would like to start with actually asking you a few questions. The first question is, well, how old was the oldest vulnerability discovered in 2020? I gave this lecture yesterday, and the answers that I received were ranging between 2, 3, and the extreme ones stated 5 years. The actual answer is 21 years old. Think about that. For 21 years, a vulnerability exists in the environment, just waiting for, as an open door, for a hacker to take advantage of that and create some serious damage. A very important gap between the actual data and what we think. Second question, according to Checkpoint, which percentage of the attacks in 2020 used vulnerabilities that were at least 2 years old? Again, the answer that I heard yesterday ranged from 40, 50, some went up to 55%. The actual data talks about 75%. 75% of the attacks in 2020 used vulnerabilities that were older than 2 years old. And the last one was about a third of the companies have not yet patched the WannaCry Explode vulnerabilities. It's pretty big number. Third of the companies know that this very, very known WannaCry vulnerability, yet haven't taken the step to fix that. So on one hand, we have knowledge, we have data, we have system. On the other hand, we have the data, which is telling us a different story. So let's start. Let's dive into that, and let's look at, as I said, that's the first section. Let's look at the security teams that are using the vulnerability scanners. Guys, if you use the vulnerability scanner, you know that it gives you great insights as to the scanning. It scans the complete infrastructure. It uses advanced risk scoring to help you prioritize, because you don't have the capacity to deal with everything. It helps you focus your remediation efforts. On the other hand, when you look at the data, when you look at how frequent companies are running scans, you see that it's not that easy to run these scans. It consumes resources. It takes time. And the data shows us that a high percentage of the customers are using scans which are older than just a couple of days. The environment is changing. New vulnerabilities are popping up every day. If you're using a scanner which was generated a week ago, the data is not relevant anymore. Another area that we learned from the data is that the scoring has different impact per organization. Most of the data that is being used is a public data, where the impact on the actual organization is dependent on specific information from this specific organization. The third area is that there is still a lot to do, even when you work with priorities. As I said, there is a capacity problem. You work with priorities, you said that the vulnerability scanner is telling you work on these priorities, work on that first. And then what you need to do is to see if you to cope with it. And there is a lot of work is being done here. Last is that the remediation is executed by IT. Remember that security is operating the tool, is doing the scan, and the remediation is done by IT. So to summarize that part, vulnerability scanners are great. They're giving us a lot, but the data shows us that there are some things that are really not being addressed by that. So let's look at the data in a little bit more, some example, and look at two insights that we are learning from analyzing the data. The first one is that 50% of the security breaches caused by vulnerabilities that were not prioritized medium or high. Now think about it for a sec, guys. You're using a vulnerability scanner. The vulnerability scanner provides you with prioritization, and you work according to this prioritization. You work on the ones that are marked as high. You work on the ones that are defined as critical and important for your organization. Yet 50% of the breaches were not caused by vulnerabilities that were prioritized as such. So, question, do we need or can we afford just to work on the high level priorities, or should we resolve somehow the capacity issues that we are suffering? The second point is that patches, or the second insight that I want to share with you, is that patches that were over 58 days old were unlikely to be patched at all in the upcoming 10 months. In a way, it is very much like when you're building your house and you didn't deal with something at the beginning, and it will be left like that for a long, long time. The data shows us that if you didn't deal with the vulnerabilities in the first or two patching cycles, most probably it will be left like that for a long, long time. And this is something that an insight that can teach us that we need to do things differently. So let's move now from the security and the vulnerability scanner to the enterprise. Let's look at the process of an enterprise. Let's look at the different stakeholders, and let's analyze what can we learn from the data on each of the stakeholders. Starting with security again. So security provide input based on the vulnerability scanner public data. Some of them take data which is unique to the specific environment, but a lot of data which is unique to the specific environment or customer does not play a part in the prioritization. If we look at the entire process of patching and we analyze the process, we look on who is working in the beginning of the process, in the preparation, who is working in the execution, how much time and many resources are being spent on each and every section, we see that the security consumed 80% of the cost of the resources, either by tools, the investing by tools or resources that are working on that. Yet only 20%, I think it's around 21% of the time is being addressed by the people from the security team. In other words, you have about 80% of the process, which is really the big portion, which is not does not have resources that are proportional to what it takes. The second group would be the information technology. 67% of the companies have the security team prioritization output as a policy. And this is very common. It's good. It's very good. The rest, by the way, the rest of the 30+% simply do not use yet a vulnerability scanner because they are medium or smaller companies. Most of the companies from medium and up are using a vulnerability scanner as a tool that will provide them with the prioritizations. The information technology team deals with over 80% of the tasks related to the remediation execution. We did a very thorough analysis of all the tasks, starting from the initial preparation, the committees, the approvals, feeding everything into the system, and so on and so forth. We mapped everything, and we found out that around 80% of the tasks are actually related to the information technology team. The third group is the application owners. So application owner goal is to have 100% availability. They want to protect their assets from downtime. Yet 43% of the suspension, a suspension is when the application owner is deciding to avoid or to skip a change in the system in order to, because of the fact that this system is being used for something which is very, very important. So they can suspend or skip a patching cycle. 43% of the suspension are done by application owners. And guess what? Some of these suspensions are actually later on not being addressed and then just left like that, causing an unpatched system, which is then being translated into a security breach. So let's zoom out and look at the operational challenges. We talked about the enterprise, we talked about an enterprise, we saw the different players in the enterprise, and we saw the data that can teach us something different on how each of these players are actually operating. What does it tell us? What are the challenges that the operation needs to deal with? So the handoff between one team to the other is an area where a lot of time is being wasted or spent. Also, some of the data is being dropped in this handoff between one team to the other, between one tool to the other. Let's take an example here, guys. Let's assume that the patching committee or the vulnerability committee decided to deploy a patch on the production. Then the IT guys would go and feed that into the system that need to be patched, defining the CIs that need to be patched, and approval need to be obtained. This will be done on the ticketing system by opening a change request. All these handoffs between one system to the other are a very risky area that data is being missed, dropped, or wrongly defined, unless, of course, it is done automatically. Second challenge is the long and manual patch preparation tasks. We have seen customers spending up to 40% of the entire time on the preparation, which from a project management perspective is great, because the more you spend in the beginning of the process, the better it is. But of course, if you could shift left everything, that would be great. But why do it manually, and why should it take so much time if there are other ways? Or that's what we should ask ourselves. Are there other ways to shift left everything without spending so much time on that? The third area is the implication on the business continuity, the uptime and the SLA. Companies, operational enterprise has goals. They need to meet a certain SLA. They need to meet a certain goal of an uptime. Because of that, there are tasks that are being avoided, changes that are being avoided. I don't have on the top of my head the exact number of the number of cycles or patches that have been avoided because of the fear of the implication on the business. But this is a definite area of concern. The next one is the elimination of failures in the patching process. I want to spend a minute or two explaining that. We as a human being have a nature of reacting to stuff. It's easier for us to do this way. We're doing it in every minute of the day. When someone is doing something, we are reacting to that. It's much more difficult to do something proactively. We know that from our day-to-day life. When you look at the enterprise, you see something very, very different. An enterprise, it's easy for an enterprise, for a group, for a team of people, for a specific human being to react to something that is happening, right? It's very easy for us, not easy, it's hard, but when there is a fire, to say, okay, I need to deal with it now. Doesn't matter what I've planned, I need to do that. Someone is sending us an email, I'm reacting to that. This is much easier than proactively doing something. And in patching, it's exactly the same. Instead of eliminating the reason for the failure, almost 96%, almost even more than that, of the companies that we have analyzed are working in a reactive mode. They are waiting for the end of the process to see the result, and they react to that. Whereas instead of doing it proactively in the beginning of the process. And the last point is the synchronization with the change management process. If you're a small business, it's not related to you. But from a medium size and up, there is nothing you can do or should do without going through the right process of the change request. If you have a system, if you're trying to deal with this challenge of vulnerabilities without going through the change request process, it will cause a delay, it would cause bottlenecks. 26% of the bottlenecks are related to the fact of a non-synchronization with the change management process. So guys, I want to take us forward and talk about the way that each of the teams are setting up the goals and how you monitor that, right? So we started with security. We talked about the different groups in an enterprise, we talked about the process, but if I'm an application owner, if I'm part of IT, if I'm part of the security team, I have a goal and I'm setting KPIs in order to meet this goal. So for example, if I'm a part of the IT team, I can set up a goal to measure the time it takes for me to execute a remediation cycle. If I'm in security, I will measure the number of critical known vulnerabilities that were remediated. If I'm in an application owner, I will measure the number of hours that the application is down due to remediation, and so on and so forth. But guess what? If you analyze and if you look at these KPIs and you try to match them against the challenges that the enterprise is facing, you will see that these KPIs are really not matching, they're not overlapping with the challenges that are set to this specific group. And what I want to suggest here, guys, it's a new, different way to define these metrics, to look at the outcome and define the matrices that are relevant for this specific outcome. Whether you're in security, whether you're in IT, whether you are an application owner, think about the outcome that you're trying to achieve as an enterprise, and then define the metrics that are relevant to that. I can elaborate more on that offline if someone is interested. So it's time to give you some more insights that we have learned from when we are running the patch management for our customers. In 2020, customer saved on average 45% on patch preparation time across IT and security. These two teams, the security and the IT, again, think about the process, try to define all the steps in the process, and then measure it. 45% on the preparation time for IT and security could be saved on average by customers if you're using the right technology. In this year so far, we are talking about an averaging, a customer averaging just under 22 days for a complete patch operation, and an average of 13 automatic remediation cycles in parallel. Now, it's important to know that the fact that you are able to do all the cycles in parallel help you decrease dramatically the number of the time to remediate. This balance between the time to remediate versus the amount of efforts and resources is the challenge, and how to do that. I want to go to the third part. The third part related to the compliance. And let's look for a minute on the compliance in general. If you zoom out and look over the years, you see that more and more regulations have been addressing the vulnerability detection and patch remediation. We see more vulnerabilities coming every year that passes. There are actually three types of three types of different compliance. The one which is related to the external one, the regulation, the one which is related to the policy, the internal policy, and the one which is related to the operation. Just recently, the Cybersecurity and Information Security Agency latest directive, defined that all the government and all the government body need to patch more frequently. Now, it impacts the government, it impacts the financial, it impacts the healthcare, and anyone who is doing business with them. Let's look for a sec. What does these regulations and compliance tells? It's defined, it dictates the frequency of the remediation. It dictates it defines the threshold of when to take an action. It helps you prioritize the remediation effort, and it impacts the risk exposure of an organization. Yet, again, look at the data, analyze it. Only 15% of the companies took steps to automate their compliance. A huge gap here between what is required, what is dictates what we do, to the low adoption that we see from companies on that. Some more insights that I would like to share with you. The fastest customer managed to finally meet the compliance, starting from a situation where they were not in compliance at all, it took them 3 months. That's a very, very fast turnaround to be able to meet the compliance in all the different levels of the organization. Nearly 70% of the customer must meet the certain regulatory regulations and are using automation to meet continuous compliance across their IT environment, which is very encouraging because there is actually no way to meet all these regulatory compliance without using tools that will help you analyze the data. There is a way, but it consumes a lot of resources and it consumes a lot of time. So guys, we talked a lot about the different aspects. We talked a lot about the different teams involved. If we are looking at integrating scanning with remediation, it provides us with the ability to have data and insightful information. If we execute, or companies that are executing the whole process via a single platform can have full visibility, and this is the fundamental requirement to be able to conclude or conduct some analysis and come up with insights. If you gather all the information in real time across all the environment, you are able to come up with insights that are helping you. If you collect the success and the failure data over time, you can identify trends and again come up with some recommendation. And if you do not keep yourself to the higher level, but rather drill down, you are able to do the same to come up with insights that are impactful. Now, if you do all that, you have insights that are impacting the practices, the way that you work with vulnerability scanners, the remediation operation, the compliance policy, the reporting, and so on and so forth. If you do all that, you can actually let insights lead, and based on that, you are able to get to where you want. So, for example, or just to summarize, you need to connect and collect the data from the entire ecosystem in order to have all the required data. You need to analyze the data and act upon it, and you need to set your policies and compliance need and learn from, it's a repeatable cycle in which you can learn and improve exactly what you do based on this insight. With that, I would like to summarize and tell you that from what we have seen, customers that are looking at the data, looking at the insights, and dictating what they do, defining the process accordingly, resolving bottlenecks, addressing areas of improvement, can achieve a tremendous change over a very short period in time, increasing their security, meeting the compliance, and saving a lot of time and money. Thank you all for taking the time to join us. And if there are any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me directly as in the email that is written here.